Well, good morning, Julie.
Good afternoon, Ed.
This is Ed Reether in Taos, New Mexico, talking with Julie Anderson in Australia. And Julie, for the audience and our listeners, it's been a while since we have talked to one another and had another session. And I wanted to just start where we left off with the last session, which was termed, or I titled it, The Thread. So if it's all right with you, and if you could remember back, let's say a couple of 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, where we recorded that and posted it on the Beezone, that would be good. So are you comfortable with that?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So just to remind you, you were ending this session we had called The Thread with us with a story or a lila about a patron that you were working with.
Yeah.
Right. And in that work, Adida was addressing the patron, but also telling the patron about his work with you.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so I don't want to go back to the particulars of that time, but what it brings up for me
Mm.
is how he worked with devotees, particularly.
Okay. Yeah.
And in that, now this is going to get a little complicated because when I say that, it brings up what what some people called the way he worked with coins, which was a reference to Shirdi Sai Baba. But also, I will use a term such as um, agency. What is agency? What is the way in which he worked with people to create agency? Because I understand that his function was to create agency, to have instrumentality for his work to go into the world. And I may be generalizing here, but that's the way I understand it.
Mm.
So, so there's a lot to that. Um, now, in that work with devotees, creating instrumentality, there has to be signs. There has to be manifesting forms, incarnating forms that show some form of his brightness, or I don't know how you want to term him, right? Because you're not mimicking or you're not impersonating Adida when you speak as a public person or somebody who's doing the work that you're asked to do,
Mm.
because it really. So this is a wide open question. So
Yeah.
maybe you could speak to what would be a sign, what is agency, what is instrumentality, who and what are coins, as he uses the term, and what is his work and your work as a
Mm.
devotee.
Mm. Mm. Okay. Yep. Well, as we have considered together before, and as Adida has communicated really clearly, which he says, I hope, he took his entire lifetime to communicate as clearly as he possibly could in direct relationship to what he coincided with or what was before him. And as we discussed, that the manner in which he worked was based upon his process of the demonstration of the seventh stage way. And he describes that in terms of, as we mentioned, the four stages of that way, but then he also describes that his work manifested in three stages in terms of his early life, and then his teaching years, and then his revelation years. That includes the outshining. So there's a lot of ways in which he would manifest his person and his work with devotees directly, depending upon what was occurring for him and his relationship, direct relationship. And of course, to emphasize the fact that he never saw us as we presumed ourselves to be. So he was working with extraordinary levels of manifestation simultaneously as he was working with us, okay? And the purpose of this, the sole purpose of this, was for him to accomplish his breakthrough into the cosmic domain so that he could manifest forms that recognized him and manifested means of agency and instrumentality. And he used many words throughout his teaching that would morph or change according to what it was that he was addressing or what he had to refine. And in the last 2 years of his life in particular, he, as he had done, constantly would go through these phases of transformation in which he would reveal more and more about his person, about reality itself, the state of being that we as devotees recognize and intuit at heart, and that which in which we are awakening, okay? But at the very beginning of his work, as we know, and as he's spoken about, and we would have all read about endlessly, is that nobody recognized him most fully or most perfectly. There were no uniquely qualified beings that came into his company, so he had to begin through his means of his recognition process of reality itself as the bright in the midst of his ordeal. His whole process was about establishing forms that could carry on the work once his embodied incarnation was done, because it had a purpose and it had a finite time, and he would always remind us of this. And the way that he worked is he was always looking for signs in the manner in which he worked at every level of existence in terms of who and what and where he was coinciding with. And so, for example, the word coins, as we've discussed, was used. And these were specific individuals, and there were many, many of them. And in reality terms, he also said that the world itself was what he was working with. Right. And that means the cosmic domain as a whole. But he had to work specifically through mechanisms that were responding to him so that he could enter into and be able to do what he does in terms of his transformative, transfiguration, indifference, and outshining work.
I believe he once used the term that his function was to acquire devotees.
Yes.
Right.
Well, and as you know, he says, I have come for my own, those who were rendered to me before all time. And that would be something that would spark a level of wondering, well, am I your own? There was actually a very early devotee who asked that question. And, his response to it, of course, as is typical relative to profundities, is that these are paradoxes. And the reason that they're paradoxes is that he's communicating these profound, ultimate esotericisms to people who are ego-bound in their energy and attention. And so the manner in which he was constantly related to, even to the day of his Mahasamadhi, he indicated that we were not fully recognizing him. He did indicate that there were some signs of that, but I've never heard a conversation that actually occurred with him in terms of what signs he was indicating were there, okay? But it was based upon the beginning signs of recognition. Now, the reason why I want to point that out, and that is important, is because you know how he uses the metaphor of a hand feeling into a glove?
Right.
And we've often said that devotees have experienced, as I myself have, is that in the context of him entering into us, acquiring us as guru enters devotee, and we've spoken about that, that is the traditional understanding of the nature of the Siddha-guru relationship to a devotee. And when the guru enters the devotee, that devotee, as he described in the early words, he would use the word agency. And he
Right.
would also use the word as these devotees are my renunciates. They are my own. They are true devotees. They are, and later on he would then refine more and more to associate specific forms that he accomplished that were his agency. And then he called what he used to call agency as the body of devotees or individual devotees that were coins. He said they were instrumentality. So there are technical ways that his
Right.
language changed in the form of what we would describe as one of his agencies. And his agencies were the artful manifestation of his that extended from his being, from the bright itself, his bodily human form being the principal sign.
And I don't mean to interrupt, but these are the characteristic things like his word, his
Yes,
lila,
yes.
his sanctuaries, what is commonly known as
And his,
agency.
yes, and his transcendental art
Right,
form.
right, right.
So during any period of time, and this was constantly, this was amazing, Ed, to the abundance of blessing and transmission that would come through him every moment, through every day of his creating, artfully manifesting forms of his person. Um, and two things about that. One is that he would emphasize that these are extensions, these agencies are manifestations of him, but to not mistake or to replace and to objectify these forms of agencies as something other than to be focused on, and then to forget the actual fundamental yoga in relationship to him as a Siddha Guru.
Right. So if I could understand what you just said, then is that if you took the object, whether it be a person, place, or thing, him,
Mm.
or the sanctuary, or the tree, or any object, as something in itself,
Yeah,
then you would be misunderstanding who he is in the transcendental sense.
spiritually transcendental sense. Yes.
Spiritual, right, right, right,
Right.
right,
Yeah.
right. And
Very,
I
very.
guess, yeah, so I guess from my understanding, this is where I understand agency or instrumentality, where it comes through
Yes.
the form, the manifestation, because it's really a transcendental spiritual, as you point out,
Mm.
transmission we're actually speaking.
Yes, yes,
Right.
yes. So when we were intimately around him, and not just those who were intimate, because his gifts would flow out from him, and those of us who were around him were just assisting him in this process as devotee servants, you could use the word, as yogis, yoginis, vessels, facilitators. Hmm.
But many also use the term mandala, right?
Yes, yes.
Circles going outward.
Yes, yes. And so,
Right.
most specifically, our greatest joy, of course, was beholding his darshan in his bodily human form and hearing him speak, hearing him laugh, feel him, smell him, touch him, watch him walk. Everything that he did, we would be able to recognize the divine reality, the state of being that he was transmitting. And this was the whole purpose of being around him, was to fall into this love bliss.
I'm reminded of when I was in the community in the 80s. There was this woman who was given the name Moth.
Yes,
Yeah,
I know Moth
and
very well. She's a sweetheart.
well, the point I wanted to make was, as you were just addressing, is that the attraction to
Yes.
his love bliss presence
Mm-hmm.
uh,
Mm-hmm.
in a way became a liability
Right.
for function, for I'm also, I mean, there's lots of stories about him telling a devotee to do something, and this devotee did not
Yes,
want to do anything but stay in his presence, and he said, "You
yes.
go."
Well, what the magic, so to speak, or the blessing grace that would actually then manifest as a response, which would then be what he means by recognition response, is where the signs would begin to manifest. That he would
And
be able to understand and know what they so-called mean in terms of the process.
I'm also reminded, and it flows with what you're speaking about. I'm thinking of an editor and a publisher, Georg Forstein, who was a writer, and he was told to write the foreword to The Liberator back in
Yeah.
the 80s. And he was confounded with first reading The Liberator.
Mm,
And
mm.
he just went into the hall and he just prayed and meditated and did what he did and came out and wrote the preface to The Liberator. And
Yes.
he said to me he didn't know how he did it, meaning
Sure.
he didn't write it.
Sure.
It sounds
That's
a little fishy. Yeah.
well, actually, you know what word comes to mind is muse. You know, the traditional word muse that is
Right,
used,
right.
or artists. I mean, that's a common understanding. Your inspiration.
That's what Elizabeth Gilbert in her TED Talk spoke about in her writing
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
um, it moved through me. I was spoken. You know, it's very, very understood through forms of those who are creative, or even forms of highly intelligent people. You know, geniuses. You know, they are moved
Right.
by forces that are greater than and beyond what would seem to be capable by most ordinary human beings, and not to negate or make lesser than, but just gifted people who have this ability. And there is just no question whatsoever that Adi talks.
Well, I'm also reminded of when he speaks about his pattern,
Yes,
because we could also say this is another sign of him, his
yes,
pattern.
yes,
Now,
yes,
now, a lot of people I understand mean when they speak about it means almost an imitation to what his behavior was and all of that. But that's not the true understanding of pattern. And as he says, his pattern is like water moving through a sandy beach, meaning
mm, mm.
where there is opening, where there is a devotee, where is there a
Yes,
transparent
yes,
somebody who's fully turned, fully,
yes.
that's where the pattern will show
Move.
itself.
Ah, yeah, perfectly good metaphor for that, because this explains a lot why he shifted and changed all the time too, is because if you recognize him, you recognize that his person and his um, nature, in other words, conscious light, and the manifestation of light as water itself, it is reverberating, moving, manifesting forms and at various levels. And so even as we manifest, as we've discussed, he's, as individual beings or animals or rooms, you know, any object, any space or place or relationship to anyone or anything, in time and space, he was coinciding with, and then the influence of his transmission would have an effect in that form, and it would then go through a process of transformation and availability to be able to manifest something about his work or his being. It would be become, you'd become there is only one. You would recognize this and be
As it,
transparent to that reality, to the reality,
as
the truth of our condition. Yes.
as you were speaking, I was thinking of the essay "Frogs and Walls," where he says even the walls have to do sadhana.
Yes, yes. And sadhana is just the receptive response
Right.
to allowing the divine to manifest. And so, for example, when we were all throughout the years, whenever we would be around him, and he would what he would produce was remarkable. And like, for example, when he would write, and I think I've described to you, he was writing constantly all the time. At some point, sometimes he would never write, and then he would do his artwork. Sometimes he would never write or do his artwork, and he'd just be working with devotees directly. Or sometimes he would be completely alone in his Sukra Kendra or periods of retreat. But whatever he was doing, he was always merely being as he is, as the heart of everyone, and entering into, as a hand feels into a glove. And then the space itself, the glove, or whatever the space is, he's entering into it. We're responding. It's becoming one. It's becoming the open hand. It's conformed so that it actually is able to communicate the nature of reality itself. And in doing that in relationship to the world as his devotee, we become an instrument. We become an article. We become part of the mandala. We have, and he said that he depended upon the coins, most especially that he worked with. And again, there were very specific ones that he indicated were really important. And these were the ones that he worked with most fiercely, that he expected, and still to this day, that we engage the most profound renunciate sadhana. And because he needed the renunciates, because the renunciates, meaning that the act of ego transcendence has become the most profound responsibility. Not that you become like him, but you're transparent to his being and his work.
Right. And so this is where I may want to ask you a little bit about the transcendental side, not just the manifestations of creating books or ashrams or things of that sort. Yeah. Because the true work, of course, is enlightenment. Yeah. And the asking for mature or advanced devotees or whoever, that the signs of a person who has entered into the spiritual dimension of the sadhana, of which there were periods of time when you were one of a very, very, very few who were acknowledged to be in that transcendental or spiritual sadhana, the aspect of that. And so, because so many, I don't know, I may be generalizing a little here too much, but the work and the advancement of students have to go hand in hand. I mean, I'm looking at the signs today, if you will, of Adidam.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. And I don't see many signs of one integration into a conversation of any real dimension. It's a very small focus thing. I've never really read or heard of people who are in the advanced stages, if you will, of life, but yet there is a talk of many things happening, everything advancing, everything moving along. At least this is what I hear. But I really don't see the signs. I see and hear the talk, but I don't see the signs.
Yes, yes, yes.
And I guess signs, is just to take one element of signs, would be growth in people who are attracted to his form as agency, his form as instrumentality, his form that comes into the world. He says, my work is not the world, your work is the world. So you're, as a devotee, are the standing place for the reception of people in the world.
Yes, yes. Okay. So this is obviously at the fore of everyone's consideration is what you're pointing to. Every devotee I speak to is involved in this examination and the same questions that you're asking. Even those who are formally involved, and have more of a, and those who have more of a direct function or role or responsibility for his work, there is this fervor, about what he's given us to do, or what we have all inherited from what he accomplished. Okay? His accomplishments. He manifested the signs, obviously, because of who he is, but indicated that we hadn't yet. However, what you pointed to earlier is that, well, it seemed like the signs were manifesting at certain point in relationship to his unique process. So I think for periods of time, a number of us, not like you say, wasn't a large number, but a good number of those who came around him most directly in intimate service to him and that he worked with most closely, did manifest certain signs of the process that indicated advancement. For example, the samadhi of the thumbs. Okay, he did acknowledge hearing and seeing and perfect practice practitioners, which are unique to his way, and I was one of those who did indicate those signs, and as we know, his teaching came from those direct relationships and conversations and considerations and observations and signs and reciprocation. That was how we participated with him in his process for him to be able to accomplish his demonstration. You see, but there is an error in presuming that because we coincided with him through his accomplishments, that then we are fully awakened in the most profound, perfect process with him, that we all accomplished that with him at the end of his embodied life, because he told us that we didn't, and that is something that we're grappling with. And well, for me, I'm not actually grappling with it because I understand precisely what he means by that. And I don't find that as a negative. I find that as an ecstatic liberation, because I keep going back to the points in time, in direct relationship with him, when he made it so clear to me the profundity of the realization of the seventh stage itself, and what it meant to even begin the way for real, based upon the seventh stage recognition, based upon the actual disposition in the context of his seventh stage way. So, for example, speaking about the glove again, his is the hand or the thumbs, feeling into, or any being who's serious about the process. It's a feeling process, a reception process of feeling, allowing the feeling being and consciously to be aware of the awakening of the what is that is being revealed. And he did this through entering into us. And then in the midst of that, we had a lot of profound experiences, that were according to the 6 stages of life. And as time went on, they became, even in the very early days it happened, but as time went on, they were something that became quite even common in various of us. And I also discovered, when I moved out of his intimate sphere and more into the wider gathering and then functioned in the world, that, well, these experiences aren't uncommon. I mean, there's many people, many devotees. It wasn't just me who was experiencing these things. And even there's a lot of people who feel that they have realized the 7th stage process. I mean, the profundities of experiences, in other words, in and of themselves are not the signs of the indication that recognition itself is actually the case, because there are very specific yogic signs that correspond with manifest signs that relate to our work in response to him. Yes.
And this is where I'm getting the term that he used, demonstration. Meaning that there's the realization and the demonstration.
Yes, yes, yes. So I'm ecstatic, really ecstatic, because I'm noticing that I'm different. And there are signs that I'm noticing by virtue of what he did. I'm noticing difference in intimate devotee friends. I'm noticing some differences, but not even nearly, even closely enough to what would authenticate the way as being begun collectively with the demonstration of the seventh stage disposition, recognition, response being so profound that that's the context within which we relate to one another. I think we've talked about this before,
Right.
but one of those
Right.
signs would be even like he uses the word, he puts the word true and truly or real and real, as we discussed before, ways that we manifest as human individuals that actually take on, that actually are being demonstrated because you are living those functions or mechanisms or roles or whatever is being manifest in the context of reality itself. So it's not just being human, it's not just being creative, it's not just being intelligent, it's not just exercising discrimination, it's not just meditating. It's not just being able to manifest certain forms of any kind of functional mechanism that would be useful for the institutional organizational work. It has the quality of truth and reality, that you
And,
can tangibly feel his form, and then therefore it would be attractive. It in
right.
and of itself, through the means that the devotees live with one another and serve with one another, and serve his all of his agencies, would then shine and feel synchronous and be conformed, fully converted and conformed to him. So, and the primary manifestation, love bliss.
And if I may add, as he points out, handling business,
Yes,
meaning also he uses the term free attention,
yes, yes.
meaning the signs. Well, one is self-understanding, is that you've realized this crazy search and whatever
Mm,
is a fruitless happening. But you
mm,
also understanding who's generating it.
mm,
So once that understanding is begun,
mm,
and you've handled the basics of money, food, and sex, just to generalize here, your
mm.
attention is freed up because you're no longer bound. Not that you've disappeared in the conditional world, you've handled it, and life now becomes a creative affair, as you're pointing to.
Yeah, yeah, yes, yes.
And there's nothing more attractive because you've seen who he is,
Yeah,
and that's the beginning. I mean, that's number uno.
yes. It reminds me of when he said, when are you going to ever get really straight and really cool? And that was something he said in, I think it's 2005 would have been during the discourses, the Avatar discourses, where he was again refining and clarifying and answering questions, and he was uncompromising. You see, this is the quality of one who would shine as his person, is the uncompromising fidelity to the isness of being itself, his person. And that then, you're able to do that, the more that there's conscious feeling awareness of that non-difference in terms of the reception of his blessing and transmission. So one of the things that he said to me when I left the island in 1992 is he whispered in my ear, always remember that your relationship to me is a spiritual one. Now, of course, everything morphed and shifted and changed, and I found myself in all sorts of situations where, oh boy, it would have seemed like the spiritual reality was, where the heck, what the, what the, what the hell is going on here? And
I
yet,
remember.
as I indicated, hold on just a sec, as I indicated, everything would always come spherically full, even though there was the awareness or observation that, yes, this mechanism is still limited, these patterns are still arising, purification is still occurring, but what was proven beyond a doubt is the certainty of his having acquired me. Like, I have absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. And
I'm reminded of you telling me a story when you did leave the island, and you had to remember your name as Julie.
yes,
You
yes,
you had to remember how to get on a bus.
yes, yes,
But you also told me that you did some massage with people who were just regular people, and
yes.
you felt, because of all the work you did with Beloved, that you
Mm.
were actually massaging Beloved.
Well, precisely. And that was the gift of recognition, simply put. And then that matures. You see, that's the maturing. You mature in that recognition. Obviously, I'm not most fully realized. One of the reasons why I can say that really abundantly clearly is because the context of the manifest means of a true culture hasn't manifested yet cooperatively and effectively at every level, functionally or manifestly, where all of the aspects of what he gave and accomplished has actually been um, uh, being given out, being like there's so much of his teaching that there was a lot of work that had to be done and it hasn't been done yet, like with the trilogy being taken on as being published in the fashion that he instructed, the Dawn Horse Testament and all of the changes, various levels of the cooperative global forum that was supposed to be happening as a cooperative culture. The mechanisms of accountability aren't in place. There aren't any advanced practitioners at this point. We're all still student beginners. And yet there are different individuals. All of us are very different in terms of how he worked with each one of us. So we have a unique skill, those coins that he worked with, and there are many, many of them that he worked with very fiercely. And it is still there is still the process of purification going on relative to us being able to, in the recognition response, allow him to enter so that we, as his Leela, part of his Leela, are alive as his form. So perhaps the next time, I would like to get more into what the agency of Leela is, because Leela is alive as his form. It's the constant mean that actually then manifests the teaching in a means that it's ever retold, 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 passed on, but presently alive. He said, not so that you're duplicating what I did, because you can't do what I did. Do as I say, not as I do. We can't do what he did. We are not him. We never will be him. Not any single one of us are him in terms of his function, his avataric function. We have a unique function, blessed as the avatars of reluctance, to actually that created the necessity for us to have to surrender and submit. And the Leela is both about his submission and our submission, both of which he submitted unqualifiedly. And oh man, as we've spoke about, just remarkable. And this has been so of all siddhas. True siddha gurus, true realizers have enacted a remarkable incarnation to hopefully influence humanity in an auspicious transformation. And in the late times, This is what he is needing devotees to participate collectively with one another. And if we don't stop our arguing amongst one another about what we all at heart really do recognize, intuit, if we don't fall into that with one another and stop all the verbiage and the tit for tat and all of that, we will never be a conduit as a collective Leela for his person. And so, yes, we're falling short. There's no question about it. And in some fundamental sense, we always did. But the only reason why he was able to accomplish what he did is because he pressed us, he moved us, And we were in love at the heart, at the depth of the being, beyond all of the limitations and priorly. So we did, fortunately, that what he needed came around.
Well,
that's the Leela. It is a miraculous Leela.
And in the further Leela of his Leela, where he came to a point where he said his work failed and that he would now only be standing in his place and waiting.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So
I'm just laughing because you know how many times he said that.
Right.
Even since like the first month I was there, it was always like everything's failed, it's not working. Yeah. But
I'm going to Ohio.
Did that stop him? Did that stop him? Yeah, right. No, it was a death and a birth. There was a constant death and rebirth, constant form of what's transformation? What's transformation? What is indifference? What is true renunciation? What is outshining? It's the death in the midst of that, which is perpetually the one that lives and breathes everyone and everything. The conscious feeling of being. That's our true condition. And that's the Leela that we live with one another, and then everything is clarified in that context. And that's literally true. Literally true. And then generative, like the regenerative ability to be able to be alive and awake, in the passionate fervor of ecstasy, to be able to manifest and serve all of his agencies, and to live the Leela, which is one of the primary ones, which he said, you have no Leela. And his Leela, which he says is confessed in his trilogy, most specifically, not in the Leelas that have been told by devotees about him. He said those were always limited in their point of view, like in introductions or whatever. Books have been written about him. His confession in the trilogy is the one that is to be studied. And that is a total paradox. Because there is no way you can grasp it through philosophical or intellectual or limited mind point of view or emotion. You cannot through ego subjectivity comprehend the nature of his confession about his work.
So I don't want to be abrupt, but there is this time limitation. I need to adhere to it. But
sure.
If we could just end there and pick it up again in our next session.
Sure.
And I've enjoyed our conversation.
Yeah.
And
likewise.
I hope our listeners and watchers have also.
Yeah. Thank you, Ed. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
thank you.
Yes. Thank you.